we were basically starting a web page from scratch. So the idea there was to build up an HTML file with some CSS and try to get some basic elements on the page and kind of like work through like what those examples sort of look like. I am trying to open my own HTML file now. Okay. Cool, so, and I will go ahead and share my screen. And I'm actually going to open a new browser window. Okay. We'll do the desktop. I think that works. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? It's a text editor.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So the first thing I actually wanted to start with today is like, and this is where picking up where we left off, and where I left off, if you were to follow along, oops. I think it's like a path. There we go. If you were to pick up this same code, you can find it here. If you go to this place we've been working from, and I just put it in this tutorial folder. So this is the code that we're using right now. And I'm going to go ahead and do what we did last time, which is to drag the file to, I need to open it in a folder. So I'm going to open it in my file explorer, and I'm going to go to where the file is here, and I'm going to click it, and I'm just going to drag. We did this last time, but just to show again. So now we can see the page that we're working on, the HTML file that we're working on. So this is the code for it. It's in a text editor, and then we can view it and make changes. And then if we make changes, we can just reload it like this. So I can do something like this, like that. And if I save it, I can reload it, and then my changes appear there. So that's the kind of like workflow we're doing right now.
You don't have to drag the file again. You can just refresh it in the browser.
Yeah, that's correct. I don't have to like redrag it or anything.
Because the path is determined in the URL.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So this is like the full path. Dragging it, you're basically just using the GUI, like your operating system's like user interface, and it's just like has some code to say, oh, if they drag a file, like just go ahead. Actually, the browser is able to do this. It knows if you drag a file, it's going to try to like use the path of the file that you gave it and then navigate to that. And then, so this is like the full path. So you could actually, like, I think we tried this one time, but like if you go one up, you can actually see the contents of the folder. This file you can ignore. It's just, I just made this file as an example. We were talking about file extensions. So we can delete that file, and it's not going to affect our project. So I can reload it. Everything's still the same, no problems there.
Can you show how to pull it off the GitHub again real quick?
Oh yeah, sure. So I mean, if you go to this URL /Page Swanson, that's me, and then you go here and to tutorial, and then this, and then what I would do is, you can do it a number of ways, but what I would do is click this raw. So the raw is basically just going to let you view it as like a text file, and you can just copy this content explicitly, or you can do this. You can say save page as. Since the page has like, it's just a text document, so you can actually, if you want, just save this, .html, okay? And you can save it to wherever you want. Like we can save it to this downloads folder, for example. And then if I go here, it actually worked. Like it just let me click it, and it just, now it's from my downloads. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. You can also just copy the text and then paste it into your text editor, like I have here. That works too.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to point out about this is like, we're kind of like where we are right now this is like a typical, and what I'm doing actually is pulling up my notes on my phone so that I can hopefully read from them a little more fluidly. But this is like actually a pretty typical workflow, like at least it's like my typical workflow at like my job. Like, so this is often like what I'm doing is like, I'm usually working on pages that like are pre-existing, like, you know, we're a software, like a service product. So what we're doing for the most part is we're basically like iterating on something that already exists as a service for, in my case, it's like banking. And so typically what I'll do is like someone will have created this code, or I might have created it a little while back, like basically adding new pages, new HTML documents is pretty rare. But if we do it, you know, it'll have been done in a similar way to this, right? And then what I'm typically doing is like we'll have an enhancement or a feature request to an existing page that the customer is using, and then they'll say like, oh, we would really like it if it could do this. So in our case, maybe the work we're about to do here, maybe we can think of it like that, and we can say like we're going to add a new feature or like some new, like a new enhancement to this existing code. So we can kind of think of it that way, and that's what we're going to try to do today. So currently we have a title. So this title comes in here. This is this tab, and then we have a paragraph, which contains a span. The span doesn't really look any different because the span is just an inline element that's like part of this existing flow of this like paragraph. So it's not going to like create a line break or anything. New paragraphs will create a line break. So that's why you see this one on a new line here. And this just contains a link. So this link, I just added this href. And then this lets me basically turn this text, this is a link, into a link. And you can see that it works. We can link to pages on the web that aren't on what's called our local, by the way. Like what we're doing now, this is like what people would call our local. Yeah, so we added another paragraph here just to show like another like block element kind of line break. So what I want to start us with potentially today is I'd like us to add some room for us to be able to style some of the elements here. So what we might start with is like trying to style some of this text. And we could do a number of things, but if anyone has an idea of like maybe what kind of style they'd like to see applied, like a simple style that they'd like to see applied, we can shoot for that.
When you say style, you're not referring to font, but
A font is a style, actually. Yeah, yeah. So,
okay.
so that would be
So
like
the
something.
font is like one aspect of style, but
yeah, right.
it could be also bulleted or italicized. These kinds of aspects.
Yeah, anything that is not the explicit like content itself, or something that's like more organizational. So if like we wanted to like move
Okay,
this.
so yeah, we could change the color. We could
Yeah.
how about we change the color to magenta?
Okay, all right.
And
So
underline it.
okay, okay. So let's make a note of that. So one thing.
And make it a Google font.
And make it a Google font. Okay, cool. Wow. That's okay, cool. That's ambitious. I like it. Let's shoot for that. So the first part is pretty easy, or it wasn't noted explicitly in our list of goals that we have. And by the way, I wanted to like aggregate our goals. Maybe what we can do is open a new text file. What I did is on your computer it might be different, but on mine it was on my Mac it was Command N. And that opens a new file for you. So you can also do probably Control N if you're on Windows. That should open a new file as well. So we'll go ahead and make a list here. So the first thing we want to do is change some text to be magenta. And then change that same text to be underlined. And use a Google font for the page. Okay, so we're gonna like break some of this stuff down, but the first thing we need to do is not explicitly listed here. The first thing we actually need to do is we need to actually include an external style sheet. So what we could do is we could add the styles directly to this HTML file, which if you've seen me do stuff before, you know, like I do that actually a lot, just because it's easier. So the way that we would do that is like, we just say style, okay, like this. And then it defaults added this type text CSS. That's just saying basically like, treat this as like a style sheet, and it's specifically a CSS style sheet. And then what I could do is I could just add my styles right away. Okay, but we're not going to try to do that this time because I think it might be better for us to see how to include or import external style sheets. So we're going to try that here.
Did you say external style sheet?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's to be differentiated from cascading.
That's opposed to inline or embedded.
Yes.
So inline is what you just demonstrated, right, Paige?
That's right. Yeah.
Embedded is something different that I'm not 100% on.
So there's embedded, there's inline, external, cascading.
No, it's just those three. It's just inline, embedded, or external. That's,
right.
That's
Yeah.
how you style your CSS, either one of those categories.
Can you elaborate on this for a sec?
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think I was a little confusing because, and also Idris, I think what you might be thinking of is, so I think this is, or like, well, I might typically call this like, I would still probably call this like an embedded style sheet, or maybe I would just do it like, I would call it like in-place styles. Maybe I'm not using the technical term there, but inline styles, typically I usually hear people, they're referring to doing this, which we could also do. And we could actually just knock out our magenta task maybe this way to show everyone something new or something they may not have thought about. But so an inline style typically is referring to doing like this. So I don't know if you've seen this before, Idris, where you can actually just style in place an element without having to create a style sheet. So this, I think, is typically referred to an inline style, and we can actually just use our keyword here. Maybe we can see if that's going to work. I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Paige. That is correct. That is inline. So I had it confused. Like, so that's inline, and you were doing embedded, and what the recommended way to do it is external. But I was also going to ask you, without trying to interrupt too much.
Oh, no problem.
What is the case scenario for using inline? Because inline is frowned upon, you know, to put it lightly.
Mm-hmm.
So what is, but there are cases for it, right? So like, but leave that, like, that's just, you know, I'm just kind of going off, but I want to let you finish. So let me let you.
And I have a quick question. Is inline and in place the same concept?
I'll answer that one because that one's pretty quick, and then I'll go.
Okay.
Idris's. No, that's okay. In place, I just like made up. So I was just using like, you know, just a way to describe it. Yeah, I think embedded is the right word. So like this would be embedded, I think. But we might be able to check it out. If you remind me, we can look into it, and I think I might know where to look for that. But I feel like embedded is a good word for it. So we would call this like embedded, and then we could put our style rules here, and then so this is how we would format our style, and then we could say like you know, text. I don't know, they have a bunch here for text. Like we could say text align or something, and we could center all of our text or something like that. So we can go ahead and show these two things really quick. So okay, look, so what we've done is we added an embedded style, which is just directly in our HTML using this style tag, and we applied it to the body of the document. So you can see body is here. and this is actually, I did not realize Sublime did this, but it looks like one advantage to the inline styles, or I'm sorry, the embedded styles, is that you can actually see the elements that it's going to apply to. It's not really doing that though, just to be careful. I'm pretty sure it's just going to highlight every, like if I said the word head here, I'm pretty sure it's, yeah, it's just, I think it might just be saying like how many times you said the word head. So ignore what I just said. I don't think that's like, the best way to debug like where your styles applied is just to inspect, remember our dev tools, and click here and look at our rules, and you'll see the styles that applied. It actually also referred as inline, by the way. So maybe it's just always inline if it's in the HTML. I like that idea. But I also like the word embedded. I mean, basically, if you were at a job and you said either one, no one would give you funny looks. I think it's okay if you said embedded or inline. I think both are very descriptive. But it looks like it's acknowledging it as what's called an inline style sheet in this case. So, but we have our text align center rule applying. So it's centered all of our text in the body. And we looked at that just looking at this text align rule that we made. And then if we go to our span, you can see that that style applied as well. But you notice that in the style editor tab, it's not going to show us what I called an inline style specifically for the span. To answer Idris's question now, I've also been taught that, yeah, like this is not preferred, like to do something like this. The reasons I can think of off the top of my head are like maintainability is pretty difficult. So I talked about how like this is often a frame of reference for me as a professional developer. Like when I'm working on something, I arrive at something that like kind of already exists. Okay, and then I'm like basically maybe iterating on it. I'm going to add a new feature. I'm going to expand on it. Okay, when I see these like style, like inline style references, first of all, they can be easy to miss. So they're not super obvious. They kind of just blend in with the other elements. This would be more clear if we had like a lot of elements on this page. Also, since typically we would most certainly have an external style sheet, which I'll set up in a second to do the remaining rules that we want to apply here, I would almost certainly miss this style because I would expect it to be in the external style sheet. And the reason we have external style sheets is because it's much easier to maintain. Whereas it looks something like this, and I know instinctively kind of like where all my styles live. Like I have all of my styles in a separate file and all of my HTML in this other file. So I can kind of expect a sort of precedence to take place. It also lets you more clearly take advantage of the principles behind cascading style sheets. So that the whole point of this framework that we're using is the cascade, where you can define rules that take precedence in like a particular like order. So and actually we can kind of show that hopefully. So maybe I'll just wait to show the kind of precedence using some of the CSS we've already written. But it is a lot easier to maintain CSS that's in a separate file, just because you don't have to look for the particular element. You can basically, you have a lookup of the CSS that you're currently using. And then it's also easier to debug, as I just showed, because if you notice, this rule doesn't show up here. So this is supposed to aggregate all of the styles that are loaded into the document. And the reason it doesn't show this one is because this is essentially like an attribute for this element, so it doesn't really come up in the same way. So you'd have to click on the element specifically to see this happening. And it'll also show up in this element category. Like you'll see other places that's not showing up, an element is empty. That's because it's an element specific style. Like like just because I added this, it's not going to apply to every span. Like if we added a new span, right? And we can add one over here. And we'll add a space, but we're going to get rid of this style. Just add some arbitrary text and we'll go ahead and load that. It's not going to be magenta. So you might think like, well, I added a style to a span. Does that mean like in my CSS how I refer to body, or if I refer to span here, which we can do, and we can do, let's actually go ahead and underline it like Austin suggested. So we're going to change the text to be underlined. I actually don't remember what the specific rule is to get an underline. So actually that's something we can use our handy documentation for. So we'll go to MDN, like I often do.
The letter U.
The letter U. Oh, that would be, I think, we can do it that way. Let's actually do it.
CSS underline.
Yeah, right. And I'll talk about that too, actually, because that's another really interesting conversation. But
So I have a question.
okay, sure.
So far, is there any CSS on that page?
On which page?
On the code, like the HTML that we were working on. Is there any CSS
In the text editor.
in the text editor? Yeah.
Yes, this is CSS, like syntax-wise. This is conventional CSS. This is also technically CSS here. So you see the syntax. This should look familiar. So we have the colon. This is the attribute, or like the property that we're trying to change. And then this is like saying, this is essentially the rule. Like, so this is like one line of this. This is just the particular syntax if you put it in the style format. And actually what we can do is we can add other rules too. So we can say like, can anyone think of another thing that we could do maybe?
Well, my additional question was, where are we pulling that from? Or like, because I think from my experience, I only saw how to do it externally. So there was like a separate CSS in the text editor, and I never saw only doing it on one page before. So are you pulling it where it says type equals text/CSS? Is that like summoning the CSS or something like that?
Yeah, no, I totally understand the discrepancy there. Yeah, so we were going to add an external, and then we were kind of like discriminating between like, well, you know, I've done this way before in some of my other examples, and I wanted to introduce this method because you can do it this way, but we were going to add an external style sheet, and then we got kind of caught up. So maybe what we'll do, instead of just adding more here, we can add the external and then compare them. And that's pretty quick to do. So let's try that actually first. And we'll do the underline there as well. So the way we would do that, we can just create yet another new file. This one I didn't save. It doesn't have a name. It's just like a list of things we want to do. But this one we will save. So to create some new CSS, we don't really have to do anything like we do for HTML files, where we have this like doc type and all of this kind of like, I've called it like boilerplate, which is essentially just like necessary code to set up for the like framework that you're currently using. So in this case, since we're making an HTML file and we're trying to like use it on the web, these are some like basic things that you would need if you wanted to like distribute this file on the web. For our local computer, like just for our machine, we actually don't need the HTML or this. It's actually smart enough and we can just get started with this. But for CSS, we actually don't need anything like that. We can just start listing off rules. So Moses, hopefully I'll kind of show you where this kind of comes in. So there's really no difference in using CSS here versus here. And we can actually just like, whoops. Well, that's fine too. That will copy our old rule. So this is actually what we had before in our sort of inline CSS. You see that it's not like behaving well. because I actually haven't given it a file type yet, I haven't saved it. So it just thinks it's a text file. So it doesn't know how to like format things, and it doesn't know how to give me syntax highlighting. So I'm going to do that really quick. I'm going to actually save it, and I'm going to call it CSS. And in this case, we'll just call it like we called it new home.html. So I'll just call it styles in this case, and I'll save it. And yeah, I have an extension here. It's just prompting me. I don't know why it's a standard extension. It doesn't really mean anything to me. But okay, so you can see it made this file, and then all of a sudden everything looks like it's highlighting. So it knows that it's CSS now. So Sublime is using its like internal thing to kind of highlight syntax for you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a rule specifically for any span. In this case, we wanted to underline, so we'll just kind of keep going that route. So what we were doing before is we were going to check out the documentation to see if there was a way of like underlining CSS text decoration is I think what we want, to see if there was a way to like underline using styles. So it might be here text decoration, which I think is like a generic property. Yeah, it is. It's a generic property, like kind of a catch-all for specifically styling text. So in this case, we actually have like a ton of options. We could do some pretty bizarre stuff in this case. We could do like a wavy underline, like similar to what you'd see if it's like suggesting a grammar fix to you or something like that in like Word. You do dotted. And basically what this is like an aggregate attribute syntax, which I could also explain if people are interested in, but otherwise I'm just gonna go grab one of these. I kind of like how this looks, the dotted, so I'm gonna grab this one, and I just copied it in my case, but we could also make some additional modifications to it. So what it did is Sublime is basically gonna italicize our property name or our attribute. I guess they typically call it a property, yeah. So our property, and then it's going to, the actual value for the property, it's gonna leave it like not italicized. So we're gonna save this, and then the last step is, now that we have this file, we need a way to relate the file to the document that we're building here. So we already have some CSS, as we mentioned, like embedded or like inline here. So what we want to do is we need to add a way to reference this existing file. And just to have some notes to make sure I remember what that looks like, because I also forget. So we're going to use this link tag, and we're going to put it in the head, most importantly. So it's not part of this style tag, right? It's separate from that. I can add some spacing, which again, HTML doesn't care about white space. This does nothing. It doesn't affect the code at all to add this spacing, but it can be helpful for you to kind of like see that they are separate a little bit more easily. So what the tag we're using is a link tag. The link tag is basically a resource tag. Its goal is to basically let you incorporate resources, usually style sheets. I don't usually use it for anything other than style sheets unless I'm using like JavaScript resources, and I think that actually might be a different tag though.
So before this, before you added this this link tag, where was the tag that brought in the CSS when you were doing all the inline stuff?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So
is that the style?
Yeah. Exactly. So okay. What's happening here is this. I guess I should cover this more clearly because I realized that it can be kind of confusing looking.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was covered on Monday or something.
No. Yeah. I definitely was just making an assumption that was not very fair. So what's happening here is a bit weird. It's not like any other HTML tag that we're kind of familiar with. Like most tags, what we have is that we have a tag, and then the content is just text, unless we say otherwise, like we added a new tag. In this case, what's happening is this tag is like special. And what it's saying is, it's saying that anything you put in this opening and closing tag area is going to actually just be CSS. Like, we're using CSS syntax. It's actually recognizing our syntax. Like, Sublime knows that we're doing this, and you can see it's like highlighting appropriately and everything. Where if we were to do this here, it would be like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing that? It doesn't know what's going on. But you know, Sublime also acknowledges, like, yeah, I know you're doing an inline style, like in this style tag. So this is no different from this, actually. It's actually the same thing.
Okay, you just happen to create it on the same page. Or,
yeah,
like,
exactly.
instead of making a separate CSS document,
yes, precisely.
Kind of created an instance of it.
Yeah, I think that might be, I don't want to say, it's not really, what's a good way to describe it? I guess it's kind of like the browser, when you load up this file, it knows that this is not HTML. And so it's not like, it doesn't have to do any like special processing or anything like that, really. What it's going to do when you load this document, it's just gonna basically kind of like pull it out. The browser will, and it'll say like, oh, cool, like this is like some special HTML directive that's telling me, that's telling me like I have some styles here. And so that's why in the style editor, it's saying like inline style sheet #1. Like it's referring to this CSS that we added here as almost like its own special style sheet.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I know that definitely is like a really weird. I like to do it because it's just so convenient. Like, I don't have to make a separate CSS file, and I only do it for small things, to be clear. Like, I would never do this for like a very large project, because the advantage of this is just that you can organize things very effectively. You can also start using other, what's called a flavor of CSS, which you kind of need these external style sheets for. Though I think you can inline some of that stuff. But in any event.
And in the case of the magenta, was that also a CSS?
Yeah, exactly. So what
in
this,
the same way?
Yeah, I mean, the style attribute is pretty old, I think. This is kind of like a relic. Well, here, there's actually more. Maybe I'll send a link to this if you're curious, because this looks like it's going to go a little more in depth about it, in case you really want to clarify it for yourself. That might be valuable. But I'll go ahead and post a link to it here. But what I'm looking for specifically is the style attribute. This looks nice, I guess. So what they're talking about is this here. I thought they might go into the history of it a little bit. Oh, look, they also use the word embedded, Idris. So it looks like we're on the right track there. So yeah, the style element used in the head of the document is like, i.e. this would be called embedded. So yeah, I guess they also said that, but so they have some examples here, like just like we have. I was hoping they would go into the history of it a little bit, just to kind of explain the difference between the two. But it looks like they don't say much. But my understanding is like it's pretty old, because CSS got introduced after HTML. And I'm pretty sure this is like the first way they thought to do it. So it's like almost like a shorthand way of adding the styles that you want directly to the element itself. This is a simplified syntax for CSS that's specific to the use of this style attribute, which you can put on any HTML element. So I can put a style attribute on a paragraph. I can put it on a link as well. I can put it on, you know, any number of things, and we can demonstrate that by using some different colors, which maybe a good way to kind of show that. Yeah, in the same way, what the browser does is it basically builds, when it builds out the DOM and it loads your document, it kind of like goes in and figures out like, okay, like they added this style tag. The browser then knows to add to the CSS, like the style DOM, which I don't know if you remember, but we talked a little bit about it a while back, and how it builds this separate document object model for itself to like reference styles for elements. So if you look at this kind of like, we can think of this like a tree, right? And these are like the branches. Then there's like a CSS version of this that allows it to apply like the styles that it's composed. And this particular style is just like a special instance of that. And if we reload this, actually, we'll see the changes that we made, right? So they got applied to all of their individual elements as well. But if we look at the style editor, they're not showing up in our style sheet over here, which we're just using the style tag for. And then maybe finally what I'll introduce, or is we'll finish off our link, which we're just going to refer to the style sheet that we made externally. So like we made it in a separate file. We called it styles.css. And we just made a reference to it. Yes, okay, cool. So we just made a reference to it in the same directory as our new home, right? So new home styles.css.
Can I ask a quick question? Maybe you mentioned it, but I didn't catch it. So let's say I have my file with a styles CSS, and then I make new styles in inline of the HTML. Those are gonna be overridden over the styles CSS. Like, let's say I'm saying that all the lines have to be blue, but then in one specific line, I want it to be red. How that works?
Yeah, that's like a perfect question, and I definitely want to segue right into that once we load this. So yeah, no, that's a perfect question, and it's good to keep in our heads. So Celeste is like concerned over like, well, if I have a style here as like an inline element, or if I have a style in this tag here as like a kind of like an embedded style sheet or an inline style sheet, then if I have a rule that's the same in like an external style sheet, which we'll go ahead and we'll save and we'll load this up. And look, our underline worked, and you can see in styles.css here, we have our rule, which is saying that all text in spans should be decorated with underlines that are dotted. So we have this here that's kind of showing us how this happened, which is pretty cool. So Celeste's question though is like, well, okay, great. Like I have now, by the way, this is like what I would call like kind of a professional development nightmare. It's a very annoying situation, and I hope it's clear to all of you how annoying it is. But now I have like styles spread out all over the document. I have to like keep in my head where they are. I don't have a single dedicated place to kind of like manage them and maintain them. And as we're about to find out, hopefully, this behavior is going to be pretty unexpected. So let's go ahead and add, what we're going to do is we're going to add a new span. Let's add it. Well, we can do this span actually. Yeah, cool. Okay. So what we'll say is that, well, I guess this one works. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, cool. So let's add a color rule for spans in general. Now remember, these are inline styles, like particular attribute styles for each element. So remember, if I style a span here, it doesn't apply to all spans, as you can see on this page, right? Like I styled this one magenta, and this one yellow, and you see they're different, right? Like it didn't apply to all spans. This one will. I'm saying for every span, and you can see that here in the way that the rule worked out. Like it did apply our underlining to all of our spans. So we're going to do the same thing, but with a color. Okay, and we'll do green this time. Wow, green. Okay. So we now have a green rule for all spans, and we're going to reload the page and see what happens. Okay. So is this what you expected to happen? And anyone is welcome to chime in.
Yeah, no, nice. I like it. I mean, just saying, sometimes when you working with a website that is already made and you had to maybe change stuff, or you had to work with a new page and already has a lot of styles or the CSS, that's when sometimes gets hard because there is templates and there is like so many of these sheets, and then you just need to maybe change a specific thing, and you don't want to change the CSS because everything will change. So you had to make these kind of arrangements to just change one specific.
I see. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kinda.
Okay. So what I would say is, like, what happened here was exactly what Celeste is saying. So, was hoping would be proved, because that is in fact the way the precedence works in this case. So what happened is that our inline rule that's set up on this attribute for this particular span, this has like the highest priority possible because it's actually directly on the element itself. So this, unless I'm mistaken, there is another way to do this, and I can actually, I hesitate to show it to you because it's like kind of like having a CSS like weapon. It's very dangerous, and you should be careful with it. But there is a way to actually like break even just this happening, and we can make sure our rule applies no matter what. But in typical cases, yeah, like basically the more specific you get with a CSS rule and a selector, in this case, our selector is like automatic. Like we don't have to do this selector like we have here where we'd say, you know, maybe we've seen some other selectors where we have like P, right? So we're gonna say like a paragraph and then like any child of that paragraph that is a span. Okay, so we're saying like only spans that are within paragraphs. And maybe instead we'll put the color rule there. So only paragraph spans, they'll be green, okay? And I mean, the same thing is gonna happen. That didn't change anything. Oh, but it didn't, whoops. Okay, I gotta reload our, yeah. So it added this new rule. The same thing happened, but it's just a more specific way of selecting our spans, which are all in paragraphs, I think. So it didn't really change much, but it's just a more specific rule. It's saying only the spans within paragraphs. This still is not more specific than having an inline style that's on the element itself, like part of an attribute for this span in particular, right? Like this is more specific. It's saying like only this span be magenta. So that's the way CSS was sort of designed. It was designed with this cascade principle. So that's where the cascade comes from. It's essentially that you have a style hierarchy that like you define for yourself with selectors and specifiers. And it means that you can basically have CSS that applies in particular cases so that I can say something like this. I can say, okay, all spans have the color brown, okay? But spans within paragraphs will be green, okay? So when we reload it, like nothing happened. And that's because this is a more generic selector than this is. So you see the rule here, like it did save, okay? But in this case, the color green won out because it's more specific selector in this case. And we don't have an inline style on this span. So it cascades down to this last one because this is the most specific rule that we have.
What would happen if you had it on the same tier? Like if you had an additional just span without the paragraph specifier?
That's a good question. Yeah, what do you think will happen?
I don't know.
Well, you have to guess.
Does it conflict with the previous span and not load properly, or will it still choose one of the two?
Yeah, I'll say it will choose one. Yeah, unfortunately, that's another thing with CSS and HTML. There's not really this sense of like, there's not a lot of sort of like automated conflict resolution and stuff. This is kind of has to do with the age of like the systems, like they're older and they're not like formal languages. So there's no like kind of process around like automating that feedback. So sometimes the browser will tell you some things like, maybe it'll say like, oh, this element like is old, or I don't know, something like that. But you know, we have everything turned on. We have error warning logs, like everything that we can. So let's see if it does say anything to us, because this is definitely problematic, right? Like we have two rules that are, yeah, indirect conflict. But I'll tell you that it'll pick one of them. So I guess it's a coin toss.
Is it the second one?
Okay, let's see. So yes. So there you have it. It's the second one. That's just because it's like last.
Right,
So,
it's the most recent thing.
Exactly, right.
It's processed. Okay,
yes,
that makes sense.
Totally, totally. And so this actually is a really good thing to point out, because this actually also applies if we added, so let's just go ahead and do this because I do like the more hands-on sort of stuff in this respect. And I don't know if everyone's been able to follow along, at least up to this point. Or by the way, if anyone is like, I want us to move on to this other thing that I'm forgetting about, we can do that too. Because I think that point is pretty clear. Like, you know, whatever the last thing, whatever the last word was, that's going to get applied. So that's all I kind of wanted to point out. Maybe, I don't know if we want to do, if we want to mess around more with precedence, or do we want to try to do the Google font that Idris was talking about?
Can we do an example where all the text is defined with one color in CSS, and then we make one element or like one part of the text a different color? So kind of
okay.
do the example that Celeste was talking about.
Sure, yeah. So kind of like the opposite. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, so what we can do is, first of all, we'll make a body rule. Okay, and that's just going to be color. And we'll make it all, well, it's kind of funny because actually, I want to point out that this is already happening. Though I guess we don't really think about it, right? But this is already kind of the case. Because the default color for text is black. So you can think of it basically like there's this rule here that's like black. And that doesn't do anything. So all text by default is going to be black on a page. And then what's happening is, yeah, we do have, like you're saying, these more specific rules that are overriding that. So I guess maybe I will talk a little bit more about that. So we get the precedence now, right? Like we kind of understand, like, okay, like whatever is most specific and whatever is most recent. That's kind of the important tenets of like the cascade idea. So
and when you say most recent, it's what is most recently evaluated in the code or most recently defined? So like line 10 is more recent than line 5, or?
Yeah, that's I think they're both, in this case of CSS, they're going to be, for the most part, with what you do, those are going to be not completely interchangeable, but for the most part, they will. If you're just defining rules like linearly, that's definitely going to be the case. So whatever is further down, that's going to be the most recent definition, and that's also what's going to be evaluated last. So if you think of it like this, it doesn't exactly work this way, but we can functionally think of it this way. Basically, what's happening is the CSS DOM, like the document, like object, but like for styles that gets built, is this like reference tree. And essentially, what's going to happen is, oh, I wonder too if we get to see the actual rules get applied. We do. This is super cool. Okay, yeah. So in the inspector, you can actually see this happening, which is really neat. I kind of forgot about this, so I'm glad we talked about it. So you can see it basically rejecting our rules, which is really nice. It's really convenient for us. And you can see which rule won. So in this case, let me get rid of this filter. In this case, what happened is it saw this line 1 rule, which said that all body text color is black. It also saw this line 5 rule, but it crossed it out, which said that color should be brown, and then it just defaulted to the CSS rule at line 10, which is green. So you can kind of think of the evaluator of our CSS, like when the file gets loaded into the browser. You can think of it as like a pretty linear process. So number 1, it's going to like go sort of like in order of precedence. So, whoops. So one thing maybe that we could do to show that part as well as our other stuff. So we'll have this span rule, color green, and then we'll add, just to really confuse it all, we'll add yet another span rule. And the color will be orange. Okay, so we have a span rule here with a color rule, a span rule here with a color rule, and a span rule here. And then we also have these specific ones. So we'll reload this. In this case, what happened is, okay, okay, that one, it was kind of a trick question, but I'll see if anyone knows why basically orange didn't get applied to this span. Does anyone know why? Even though we added this span rule and it's like in the files?
Is it because of the span and paragraph rule?
No, so we got rid of the span and paragraph rule. That's gone, yeah. Does anyone else have any idea why? Okay, so check out, like, so let's like look back, like this is how I might debug something like this actually. So, I'm looking, okay, what CSS is getting applied? Okay, I have this inline at line 5. I have this line 1. So this is all of my sources. So then I would like break down all of the sources I have available to me. So I have like these inline styles, okay, here. And then I have this style source here. And then I have this one.
Is it because the sheet is linked after that span tag?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, let's try it. Yeah, that is it.
Cool.
So yeah, yeah. So it's just the same principle, just applies continuously. Like by definition, this came before this one. So anything inside of this external style sheet, oh shoot, I lost it. Anything inside of this external sheet will override on principle anything before it. And then if we added one's external style sheets after this, they would override in a similar way. Yeah, so hopefully that's like, it was a kind of cool clarification of all of this like cascade stuff. And then just, I know we're a little over, but I just want to point out one last thing. I mean, maybe I kind of demonstrated it, but hopefully you can see why this is like bad. Because of this precedence system. On the one hand, Celeste, like the point she brought up is like sometimes you don't want to modify this external style sheet because you're not fully aware of the scope of like the changes that you're going to make, and you know the style sheets could be used elsewhere. And so you just apply an inline style like this to solve the problem. So let's say, like, for example, right, like, oops, we wanted this span to not be green anymore. Okay, we wanted it to be magenta, right? So Celeste is like inspecting it, and she's like, okay, I have all these styles, all these different color styles applying to it. Like, I don't know which one is going to work. And let's say there's like way more of them. So it can appear easy to just add our inline style to just solve the problem immediately. So like, I know that this is like going to take precedence no matter what, and it's just going to work. And I don't have to go and edit other style sheets to do that. Well, this solves the problem exactly one time is the biggest disadvantage of this that I would try to convey to you. Because now if someone needs to change the color again, they're either going to, yeah, do what you did, which is just accumulate more inline rules here, or they're going to think to approach it from the style sheet perspective. And now they're at a loss because they try to change just this one color. So they say, oh, like, yeah, it shouldn't be magenta, right? Like it should be green. So, but we want it to be orange now. So they try to make it orange, and then all of a sudden, like, it doesn't work. Like it's not working. This means that you have to be aware of the particular element in this case to modify the style. Like you have to know that this particular element exists. This is fine for this case, but now if I start having, right, like what if I have dynamically generated content where I have like 8 of these spans, depending on some data that lives on a server or something. I can't go and modify the style of like 8 of these spans individually very easily. It would be much easier if I maintained a style sheet that said for spans, and maybe I gave them a class. We didn't talk too much about that, but for spans that have like dynamic class or whatever, they should all be color, red. So that way, instead of doing this, I can say this has a class now, and I can say dynamic. And now, why are you orange? Oh gosh, so this failed me yet again. This style is more particular, or sorry. No, actually, I would kind of expect this one to work.
The spelling is off, I think.
Oh, you're nice. That's yet another failure. And by the way, before I reload, let's catch that because I think it's useful. And this is the kind of the last word I'll give on it. Moses' point is really good. It's like the spelling was off, but like, how would I see that? Like if I didn't see that right away, like how could I figure that out? And the best way again is like, if we just go back to the inspector and we look at the element, right? We see if we go to our span with class dynamic where I did spell it right, we'll see like it's our red is not showing up. So from there, we should be able to know, okay, let me go look at the rule again and figure out what went wrong. And hopefully we would see that it's just misspelled. So we'll actually spell it right this time. And this should be the most specific thing now. So even with this inline rule or embedded rule being here, it's still more specific because we're referring to this class. So I would give that to you as an argument, like Celeste, like it's always going to be better. I mean, even if what you could also do in that situation, Celeste, is like try to build a class that is specific.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's specific for your case, right? So then what you're not doing is just like adding a really particular rule that will always affect this element. You could say like, even something as weird as Celeste's, dynamic element or something.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can like use this and like.
I never thought about that. Okay.
No, yeah. I mean, it's totally just like, over time you start to like find things cumbersome. And, you know, hopefully, I mean, this is definitely nice because now everyone knows anything with this class is going to be like that. And they can also build rules around it, right? So if they still want your span to like be text aligned, they can like account for it when they're writing, they're coming in and finding your code later. So hopefully this was like helpful in kind of understanding CSS and like the way it has precedent and all this stuff.
So could you also just place the reference to the style sheet like just later down the line? And so that,
yes. Yeah, you
that would override the stuff that came before it?
Yes, you could. Yeah, so if you wanted to, yeah, instead of reordering it up here, I guess is what you mean, like we could put it somewhere. That's actually where something like a footer comes into play, which I talked a little bit about, I think, 2 weeks ago. But yeah, you can have this like footer. Yeah, you could, oh shoot, I lost it. Okay, so press the wrong keybind. So if I add the footer here, and then I do it, I mean, this is going to do the same thing, right? Because we didn't, it was already at the bottom. But we can add footer styles too, nothing wrong with that. So in this case, we could put it here. I don't think it's going to override V, because they're still more specific. Yeah, it's not. So
okay.
Yeah, these are still the most specific because they're like an attribute of the element itself. So they're not going to go away. I think in this case.
But you said there is a way to override it, right? Or to like.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did forget to bring that up. Okay. So let me make sure this one's actually like doing something really specific in this case. You know, we'll do style and we'll say color. And we'll just make sure I do know what I'm talking about. And that these footers, I don't really use footers that much. So, and we also don't use inline styles too much. So, okay, so it's still more specific, right, than this span. So you saw it was orange before. Okay, so how we could do it from the back end as well. And let's say Celeste made her change and she did this. This is actually like, it sounds like a joke, but this is actually a common thing that happens in development. It's like a really, you know, frustrating process. Like, so basically let's say me, I'm like the paragon of developers. And I just did so well, and I made this wonderful style sheet, and I made it external, and we got rid of this stuff. You know, we don't want that anymore, let's say. And I have this style sheet, and it's great, and it's doing all this cool stuff. And Celeste comes in, and she's like, I really need this element to be magenta, and I don't know the scope of Page's style sheet. It might be used by other stuff, so I don't want to change it. So I'm going to add this inline style. Actually, let's say it's not Celeste, because she just learned that you don't have to do that anymore. So let's say it's like someone else.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's say they added this, right? And then they were like, okay, great. Yeah, this one is magenta. I'm done. Submit my work. It's good to go. Someone checks it off or whatever. Okay, so what I would do then as another dev, right, is like, let's say you did this in a bunch of places and I'm just like sick of it and I don't want to deal with it anymore. And I'm like, I don't want to think about it. What I would do is I would do this, which is really the worst. Like, this is like the final say. So I would say, okay, well, fine. Your color is magenta. That's great. I want it to be blue no matter what. So I would say it's important.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
And now everything is blue. Yeah, so you just can eat it, and I'm like, everything is blue. You know what? Just, I'm done with you. Okay, this is really terrible. Like, it's really annoying when people do this. But sometimes you want to do it if you're trying to maybe enforce standards. There is a use for it. Like, let's say, for instance, we run a website and we care that, like, always for our users, in any scenario, like, this particular element is always red. Like, it's very important because our users expect a certain standard or format for our website. We might want to do something like this because it means, like, we don't have to worry about devs potentially, like, messing up. And usually what you'd be doing as a dev is, like, you'd be debugging this, right? You would have made a rule in a style sheet like this, and you would have made it somewhere else, like color orange, right? And then this would be in a separate style sheet that's like included on every page on our website. And so you wouldn't necessarily, this wouldn't be at the front of your mind, and you would make a rule and then you would debug it and you would say, huh, like, why is this blue? Like I made it orange. And you would inspect and you'd see, okay, there's this important rule. So hopefully you would then go look at that style sheet and you'd say, okay, I understand. So all of our spans need to be blue for whatever reason that is. And then you would maybe hopefully talk to the person that did that rule, or, I mean, there's cases for it. I've seen it come up in my own work. Like we kind of do stuff where it's like font, for example. Like we don't want developers changing the font because we want all of the font to be uniform and consistent. So that made me. Oh,
I think I haven't seen it too with more complicated stuff, like with alignments or like tables or things like that,
right.
where you
Totally.
can, it's really hard to change things and more than a font or a color.
Yes, yeah, totally, absolutely. Yeah, so I hope if anything, you maybe definitely think about the class approach, sort of like, or even, you don't have to do a class. If it's just one particular element, you can add an ID, and IDs should be unique. So, or you should try to make it unique. So this particular element, something like that, and then we can use the ID in a similar way to class. So an ID is just going to be like, it's just going to be like, it's expected that it's just one thing with that ID. You can definitely get into trouble if you start giving IDs to the same thing. And the HTML, in most editors, it might actually yell at you if you do multiple of the same ID. I kind of doubt it, but we can try. I mean, yeah, Sublime doesn't care if you do it in this case, but like some editors, like I use like Writer at work, but Visual Studio as well will, like if you're making an HTML file, it'll actually say like, hey, you already have this ID. Like, are you sure you want to do that? Oh, right, we saw the important file. So now it's red, and it's saying like, just this one, like make this red. That's another good way to do that without doing the inline style. And this, like, people can easily see this. Another developer could find this and be like, oh, okay, like, they added it just for this one. And then maybe someone could like accommodate it later, or they can, at least you're not making more work for someone.
So this is an etiquette thing that you just did.
Yeah, it's also like, but I want to really stress, like, maintainability is also really important. Like, it's going to help yourself too. So it's etiquette in a sense, it helps other people, but it will also help yourself, because if you come back to this later, having all of the styles aggregated in one place is far easier to maintain. It also, I want to point out, what if I want to make a new page, right? And I want it to look like this. Well, the easiest way would be hopefully I can just copy my style sheet, right? And bring it over elsewhere. And even if this page doesn't have the same content, maybe like every span that is in a paragraph can be read, like, this kind of thing, right? If I build my styles with this line of thinking, I can then extend it to other places. If I build them like this, right? Like, I will have to find every single instance of this and then replicate it over manually. So it's a term people use is the word like extensible for that kind of like frame of thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much. It was really, really awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Hopefully people were able to follow along. Again, I will submit. I'll probably make it a little bit cool. I don't know if it's really useful to have all these conflicting CSS rules. Maybe what I'll do is simplify them. I don't know what anyone in here thinks, but if you'd like to see these, to see how they all interact with each other, or if you'd like me to just basically post, like, I'll return I'll keep all these style examples and then maybe have like just one of these and this.
Yeah, I think it will be easier like for us to have it like more organized, I think.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what I'll do then is I'll basically, get rid of these duplicates and stuff, and then I'll post this so that we're caught up again. And then next time we'll, I think what I had in mind was we're just gonna add some more HTML, just introduce a couple more elements, and then hopefully we'll talk about what we want to do next after that.
Okay.